on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
It was in 2015 that people decided that adults could do colouring. It was sort of like a big medical kind of movement. It's stress relief, all of those sorts of good things.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers. No more barriers. No one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello, yes, it's the Self-Publishing Show with Mark and...
James.
Confused you, didn't I?
I'm confused.
You didn't fall for it. Yes, you can.
I'm pretty sharp.
You are. Yeah. You can tell we've recorded a couple in a row here because it's the middle of summer. Coming towards the end of that big summer month of August, although I did see someone referring to August as an autumnal month on social media. I thought that's not right. Surely we can still cling on to summer here.
Technically and temporally.
Temporally. Get you. So you're going to Lowestoft. I think you're going to be in Lowestoft at the time we record this. This goes out, and I'm camping at the weekend, which is a dangerous thing to do in the UK. But the forecast is good, sunny.
You've been camping for a long time, James.
I'm going to camp it up down the road. Excellent, good. Well, we talked about AMS AdWorks last week, and as I said at the end of last week's episode, we talk a lot about genre fiction because you get 10 self-publishing authors in a room, 8 of them probably writing genre fiction. It's just how it is. So, romance or thrillers or sci-fi, whatever. However, outside of that, we get constant and regular questions from people who want to do children's books, they want to do illustrated books, they want to do, pluck something out of the air, colouring in books for adults, for instance. Does that work in self-publishing? And we think, broadly, if you can upload it, all the accoutrement is there, the ability to make money and be commercially successful is there. It's going to be harder in some areas than others. Every now and again, we meet somebody who is doing just that. And this was one of those examples. In fact, I think you met Selena Fennec away on one of the 20 Books events.
Yes, I was in Bali in January to do the 20 Books to 50k Bali conference, and I met Selena there, and I remember asking what she did, and she told me, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Then she told me how much, kind of in ballpark, how well she was doing, and I was like, well, that's very interesting. So, she goes outside the genre fiction. That's not what she does at all. So it's interesting. And before we go into exactly what she does, it is also worth saying that we get people saying, can memoirs work? Can children's books work? We get children's books an awful lot. And they definitely can. And one of the reasons they can work is because it's underserved. It's a big market, but it's underserved by indies. And we'll see exactly, what Selena's done is very impressive, but I don't think she has that much competition, certainly not from the indie space. I don't know anyone else doing what she does, from the ranks of, from the dark side. And because of that, because there is less competition, but still a big demand, the ads can be super cheap and they can convert at a very high rate, which makes them really profitable. So by using Facebook ads and Amazon ads in those small niches, memoirs another good one. I heard Joanna Penn talk to a memoirist not too long ago, and she was doing really well. And this kind of goes against most prevailing wisdom in that there's no money in these small outposts of publishing, which frankly is you can debunk that now. There is money in it. People are doing really well, writing stuff that may be a little bit esoteric, and doing something unusual like Selena's doing.
Yeah. Well, we should give away what she's doing. And I mentioned it as one of those obscure examples, but she is doing adult colouring in books. So there was a big explosion a few years ago. Suddenly it was in the papers of adult colouring in as therapeutic links to doing it. Now, it may be, as Selena says in an interview, it's gone down from that peak, but it's still very much there. There are still people buying hundreds of thousands of adult colouring in books every day, and there's a few people supplying the market. She's doing it completely independently, completely indie. It's really, really interesting. And she's not making pin money. This is not a little bit of extra money to supplement her career. She is making good career money doing this.
Well, she made enough to go to Bali.
She did indeed. I mean, she's in Australia, so
Go on. Yeah, she's in Australia. That's right. Before we actually jump into the interview, I think you should, for those watching on YouTube, you should show. Given that James was skeptical that what was possible, and so he actually went and bought one of Selena's books on Amazon.
I was amazed when she told me she's doing it. You'll hear my incredulity in the interview. She says she's doing it print on demand. So this is Amazon POD. This is one of the books. These are, I mean, obviously, it's quite saucy. These are the fairies. This is a fairy colouring in book. And this is a particular type of colouring book. You have to be watching on YouTube for this to make sense, in that it's sort of grayscale.
Well, I can describe it. I mean, these are beautiful pictures. So Selena's obviously a very, very talented artist. And they look amazing. I am really impressed with the quality that we're getting from the and I've been to the print cell in Amazon's Milton Keynes depot that serves James's. Close the book now, James, you pervert. I've been to the print cell in Milton Keynes where these books roll off the press, and I have to say I did not know that they could produce books of this format at this quality. And I haven't actually had it in my hand, but I can see from what James is showing us that this is really high quality stuff. So
it really is.
I'm impressed both with Selena and also with what Amazon what they can put out in terms of the product itself.
And just bear in mind, she's in Australia. She just uploads she formats the file, uploads it, and this gets printed down the road from me, as you say, in Milton Keynes.
Crazy world.
Within a day in this crazy world. Okay, let's hear enough chat from us. Let's hear from Selena.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Selena, here we are. We are reaching across the divide. We couldn't be much further apart. If you're in New Zealand, I think you'd be slightly further from the UK, but it's still a long way.
Yes, yeah, that's pretty much as far as you can get. Yeah,
it is. But it's lovely to talk to you, and the miracle of technology, we can see and hear each other, which is great. So we are going to talk about your slightly unusual use of self-publishing, the success you've had with that.
That's right.
Before we get onto that, let's talk a little bit about your more traditional start, I think, in self-publishing. So you started writing, or at least you started self-publishing in 2011.
Yeah, so really back in the early days of self-publishing, I think it may even have predated Hugh Howey's success with Wool. It was way, way back then. I think around the Amanda Hocking time, that was. But I was actually already self-employed as an artist at that point. So I kind of came around full circle in a way with my career. So I was pretty much, I've been self-employed for like 15 years now. So almost straight out of uni, I worked for about a year, and then I've been working as a fantasy artist, painting, fairies and mermaids and dragons and all of those fun sort of things.
And on that, is that as a commission for people? You work illustrating books or just doing them for sale?
I've done really a bit of everything over the years, yeah. So some of it was commission work, and then I went more into merchandising, licensing, that sort of thing. And then, it was probably 2010, maybe a little bit earlier. I had a few changes in my life, and I was like, well, what do I want to do now? I've achieved so many of the goals that I'd set out to achieve becoming an artist. I said, well, I've always wanted to write books, so I had a go at that.
So was it urban fantasy, you said? Or just YA?
It's, young adult fantasy. It's got a bit of a Victorian, Arthurian fairy tale mix. It's one of those, it wasn't written to market. So it's, it was definitely a fun project to do, and I saw it through all the way through to completing the trilogy. And that's what got me into the whole self-publishing industry.
Yeah, so that's and then you've merged the two. But before we come on to that bit, so just to quiz you a bit more on the trilogy that you wrote. So were you a big reader? Had you written before then? Where did writing come from?
So I've always been a big reader, a huge reader. And then, I was writing even in high school. I was writing books. Then art came more into it, and I wanted to be a comic artist. I wanted to combine, the art and the words together, and then the art took over. It became successful quite quickly, relatively, becoming any creative career can take a bit to get going, but it took over very quickly. So I'd always had that writing side to me, but then learning how to write properly was a huge learning curve. And,
welcome to my world.
Yeah. So my first book, I think I had been playing with the concept on and off since 2002. Like even back in university, I was, writing character notes and ideas and things. The story changed drastically by the time it was published in 2011. That's how long it took to write my first book.
Good. Well, I like to hear that because that's how long it's taken me to write my first book, and I have very similar experience of learning to write and the story changing and so on. But anyway, okay, so you did that trilogy, and then, as you said, you always wanted to be a comic book creator, writer.
Yeah, I went through a huge comic book phase when I was a teenager, and that's when I really started taking storytelling and art seriously. I was actually seeking out tutorials and self-teaching and taking every bit of art training that I could get.
And so you discovered self-publishing, the traditional way of self-publishing, and writing a novel, I guess, the mainstream way of doing it. And then you thought, hang on, I could use this platform and make my other dream come true, I guess.
I did, yeah. So I've had some other works traditionally published, oracle decks. So they're a bit like tarot decks, where I worked with an author and I did the artworks. And I worked with a traditional publisher for that. And they were going to publish an art book for me. And as an artist, having your own beautiful art book, it's one of those, top goals for most artists. But that was just around the time of the GFC, global financial crisis, like back in 2008 kind of zone. And they just decided that they couldn't do that. And I was like, a couple of years later, I was like, well, I'm self-publishing and you can print books in colour. And I did some art books as well as my trilogy then. And then I had a few black and white line work pictures, and I was like, well, I could put out a colouring book. Why not?
So you did that. You went down the self-publishing route with illustrated books. And where are you now, Selena? What do you routinely publish yourself?
It's almost all colouring books now. So I had that one lonely colouring book in, it was 2014 that I put it out. And towards the end of 2014 and early 2015, I started seeing some really interesting things happen to my sales charts. And on almost all of the media, Joanna Basford was making news for having sold 1 million copies of her colouring book. She was top of the charts for that entire year, pretty much, of all books. And I was like, okay, this is a thing. So it was in 2015 that people decided that adults could do colouring. It was sort of like a big medical kind of movement. It's
so
art
therapeutic.
therapy. It's stress relief, all of those sorts of good things. And so I kind of, tested the waters, and I put out 3 new colouring books that year. And I think that Christmas, just in December that year, with those 4 colouring books out, I sold about 10,000 colouring books.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the practical side of that. You're in Australia. Are you selling in Australia? Are you selling in the States, Europe, or?
So I'm using the print-on-demand services. So what was CreateSpace, what is now KDP Publishing. I looked over and over into ways to print them myself in some other way, but managing the warehousing and distribution, when so many copies were going out, there was no way for me to keep up with that myself. So print on demand is just such a beautiful solution for a small business like myself. That colouring books took off so quickly, I was not in a position to be able to do anything with that myself if I didn't have print on demand to meet supply.
Yeah, it's also, I think, print on demand is a very eco-friendly way of doing it. The old system of having 25,000 books sitting in a warehouse on speculation that they're going to be bought and then sometimes they end up pulped, but yeah, an efficient way of doing it.
And as you said, I mean, I'm in Australia as well, and I've done a lot of merchandise shipping myself. I used to do a lot of manufacturing here in my own studio of artwork-related merchandise and things, and shipping from Australia to anywhere else in the world is extremely expensive. So if I were to try and print things myself, warehouse them, I wouldn't even be able to keep them locally. I would have to be finding international solutions still anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, CreateSpace and KDP Print on Demand as it is now, I have some passing experience with it with novel-sized books, but I don't think I'd really looked into how big and what the scope is of what you can actually print on that platform. Is it adequate for you? Because I imagine colouring books, you want them to be a reasonable size.
Yeah. I've actually got some.
Excellent. So if you're watching on YouTube, you get to see this.
So this is, so that they are 8.5 by 11 is pretty much the largest that you can do. And I've discovered, I think anything under 100 pages is the same price to print. Like there's like a base price that paperbacks start at, and then you go, as long as you can fill those 100 pages, you might as well,
Yeah.
And so I just kind of went with that format. I started doing 25 designs in each book because that's sort of the amount of work I could do to get the books out still at a reasonable pace. Because if I was doing 50 designs, it's going to take obviously twice as long to create. But to fill that 100 pages, I offer the designs twice. That gives people the opportunity to try out different colour schemes, or, this is meant to be a stress-free experience. And if you've got one design and you're worried about like stuffing it up, that's, I think, having 2 designs is the way to go. And it worked out well that way. And I actually had quite a few people copying my model of offering it in that format after my books that one Christmas when, they were doing pretty well. That was
offering the design twice something you came up with, or did you see other people doing that?
I'm trying to think back whether it was something that was, directly my idea. There might have been some other people doing a similar thing, but I think mostly they were just sort of one set.
Yeah, because as you say, that does tap into it being a kind of therapeutic, stress-free thing that you can practice and make mistakes and cross the line, which I guess is the big thing you try not to do when you're colouring in. And it's an odd thing, this, because I can remember, and it must have been, as you say, about 2015, there was suddenly this burst of magazine articles about colouring in and adult colouring in books. And it felt like it might be a fad at that time, but here we are now, 2019. Is it still going strong?
It's definitely died down a bit. So, 2015, 2016, you could walk into any shop and there would be colouring books, at the counter. They were everywhere. It's gotten back to the point now where it's just the people that had really gotten into it in a big way that are still the customers. But it's about a third of what it was at its peak. And when we were doing some business planning based around what was happening, we looked at some other big trends that had sort of come and gone, like the scrapbooking and things like that for a while it was, everything everyone was talking about. It was in all the stores and then it disappeared. But when we actually did some research on it and looked at the numbers, almost all of them, they would go up really quickly, they would peak. But when they dropped back off again, they would almost always level out at about a third of what they were at the peak. So they've had that visibility and they've gained these long-term fans. So that's pretty much what colouring books are doing as well now.
So for you, still today, it's a profitable business?
Absolutely, yeah. So all through the last few years, I did take a bit of a break last year, but I'm getting back into them again this year. I just put out as many colouring books as I could. I've got over 30 colouring books and sort of subsidiary style products out now. And they still are absolutely the majority of my income.
Why do you think people enjoy colouring in? So I'm wondering if it's because they are, like me, like the idea of drawing but don't have the talent that you've got? Is it sort of making up that shortfall, giving them some reaching out and touching what it feels like to create a bit of art?
Yeah, well, it is very satisfying in that way. And it's like anything that you can see very quick results of what you're achieving is very satisfying. Even I find colouring in a lot more enjoyable than I find actually creating original paintings.
Oh, really?
Original paintings is quite stressful. There are so many decisions to make. You've really got to use your brain so much at every point. Same with writing, there is so much hard work that goes into creating sort of that original thing. But when I've had to colour in some test pieces of my own work, it's fun. It really is. So I can see why people like it.
I'm just having a look at your colouring in books. So the fairy theme is definitely a hallmark of Selena Fenech. Yeah.
Fantasy is really my main brand. It's been what I've always loved. So
that's a bit on the brand. Yes, absolutely. And it's an immediately obvious at a glance that it's your artwork. You can see that all over it. So when you're creating an illustration to be coloured in, what are the restraints on you compared to, for instance, if you were just going to do a nice bit of artwork to go on the wall? Because I imagine there's a different approach.
Yeah, it's quite different. I found that the artworks that I create for colouring pages are very different to what I would create if I were just making a painting. I tend to do the composition differently because you want to fill the space with interesting things for people to colour in. You want to have not too many big open spaces, but not too many fine, delicate, tiny little hard to see spaces. So it's really quite a balance that's a bit different to when I paint. It can be a bit more painterly. All of the details can blend together a bit, but you can't have that when it's just black and white line work.
So the pictures at a glance look quite busy to me, which I guess is one of the, it's probably like a jigsaw. I guess children's colouring books are very simple and then they get progressively busy, and these are designed for adults. A bit more of a challenge. The hair looks interesting to me. How do you do hair knowing that somebody's going to colour it in? Because you've got to have some finite lines, haven't you? Whereas hair often is indistinct, particularly in photographs.
Yeah, hair is a bit of a challenge. Part of my style with artwork, though, is sort of the long flowing hair. So I can stylize it quite a bit, have some interesting shapes. Basically, it's just keeping the enclosed spaces. So you want lots of enclosed spaces that you can just colour a bit and colour a bit and colour a bit, rather than having to try and keep your colouring going through a very large, complicated maze of lines.
Okay, and your genre, which you describe as fantasy and is fairy inspired, looking at it, how wide are these genres? Do you get the similar sort of genres in colouring books? Are there thrillers? Are there horror and gore? And dare I mention it, sex is probably one as well?
You can get anything in colouring books these days. Since the trend went big, it's like you think of it, you name it, you will find it in a colouring book. All of the big brands, all the big TV shows, all of the big books got their own, sort of matching colouring books. There are, Dinosaurs with Day Jobs. That's one of my favourites.
Dinosaurs with Day Jobs.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was. It's one of the early ones that was, one of the forging the path for adult colouring. So you can get really humorous ones, and then you can get there's a whole genre of swear word colouring books. That's a big thing. There's just about everything, but I kind of stayed in my lane with what I really like myself, which is the fantasy genre.
Yeah, and in terms of marketing, how are you marketing these books?
Well, that's been interesting because, when they started just starting to sell, I've been with the self-publishing groups and stuff on K-boards, and then when everyone sort of moved over to Facebook, and you would always see people in the community have a book that would just take off, and you always cheer those people on, and you sort of wish that you were that person too. So when my book started taking off, I was like, what do I do now? How do you keep that going. And it was actually around that time that Mark started advertising his course, his very first, earliest access. When it was back, it was called Facebook Ads for Authors or something like that back then. And so I did his free, he had like a free starter course that explained his mailing list process. And I thought, oh yeah, I can definitely apply this to what I'm doing. And, you know, I created some ads where I gave away a 10-page sampler PDF to attract people to my mailing list. And I still have pretty much that same ad running today, that it's done so well for me. It brings in about 20 new subscribers every day to my list, and I've got my automation onboarding series of emails that those people receive when they sign up, that let them know about me, about my books, what they can expect to see, highlighting different books, giving them more free pages the longer they subscribe, that sort of thing. And I find that process has worked really well.
So the PDF is something people would download and then print the sheets to colour in at
That's
home.
right. Yeah.
Which leads me to wonder about that digital delivery, because obviously the Kindle model does not work for colouring in books.
No. Well, that's interesting, because when the trend was very big, there were a lot of colouring book ebooks on Amazon. And it would always be, you know, sort of like a sample in the ebook, and then they would have a link to the full proper PDF that you would download and print at home. But then Amazon decided that no, you cannot do colouring books as ebooks anymore. It is explicitly listed as not allowed for ebook anymore.
Okay.
However, myself and a bunch of other colouring book artists that I know, we're using Etsy at the moment as our main store for downloadable products. And it works pretty well. I mean, there are other options like Gumroad and Payhip and things like that that do great file delivery. But I do like Etsy it's got its own traffic there as well. So a lot of the customers come from Etsy itself. And they also manage all of the taxes for you, because the VAT does apply to the digital products as well, of course. And so that's hard to manage. So it's great to have a company that does that for you.
So where is your split of sales at the moment?
Still a majority print on demand colouring books is still right up there. It's maybe 10 or 20% of that is downloaded sort of digital files, yeah.
Via Etsy or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Very interesting. I don't think we've had anyone who's used self-publishing in quite the way you are. I wonder how many more people are out there might come forward and say, I'm doing a similar thing, but it's absolutely no reason why this platform doesn't lend itself to exactly this. And but you've also, I think you've got it right at the beginning in terms of building up that mailing list. Probably Mark's course was about the right time for you, just at that moment where you were wondering how to do it.
It was perfect timing. It really was. And, you know, sort of, I did the free course first, and I applied that for quite a while. But then being able to take the full course, and I was only able to take the full course because the colouring books were doing well, because the mailing list was starting to build up. And then that helped me out. You know, I got to the point where my mailing list was big enough that I could start doing lookalike ads on Facebook. And they really are, you know, so much more effective than the other targeting that you can do. So that's really, the stuff that I've learned in that course has been invaluable.
And are you running ads today?
Yeah. So I still have Facebook ads running. I have AMS ads running for the colouring books too. That was one of those fun stories of wishing that it was a possibility for so long when CreateSpace, I had my books with CreateSpace, and you couldn't run AMS ads for CreateSpace published books. But then KDP started doing paperbacks. So I was like, okay, I'll move a couple over and see if that works. But no, even still, you couldn't do, even if they were with KDP, you couldn't do ads with AMS. So finally, because I was checking all the time, waiting for this change to come, because I knew it had to. it finally did, and I think I spent about a month or two of solid work moving all of my titles manually from CreateSpace to Amazon to KDP so I could take advantage of AMS ads for my books. I think I had finished the last transfer, and it was like a week later that they announced that they were automatically moving everyone over from CreateSpace.
Yeah, and they would have done that for you.
Yeah.
There you go. It's good to be ahead of the curve, though, Selena, just to put it that way.
Yeah.
So you're running ads, you've got your mailing list, which is building up, and this is now your core business. This is your primary income, is the colouring books business.
Definitely. So I'm still selling, even now that the trend has slowed down, I'm probably selling about 2,000 colouring books a month.
Fantastic. Well, that's really good. But they look beautiful. I'm really tempted to order one and have a look at it because I think they'll be really great works of art. And I haven't coloured in anything for many years. So although I have to say they look challenging for me, I might need a starter colouring in book.
I have a whole range. I've got the some slightly simpler ones because now that the trend is shifting a little bit away from the adult colouring as the trend, I've found that the colouring for kids is starting to become more popular again.
Oh, is it? That's interesting. Okay. And I've absolutely no doubt that there's a vast array of Star Wars colouring in books should I decide to.
I'm sure you'll be able to find lots, definitely.
Any chance of you going back to your YA writing, do you think, or is it now all about colouring books?
That's the plan. Yeah, no, I wanted to get back to writing for a while. So I have kept up a bit of writing over the last few years, but the plan is to really pick that up again now. I've been working to cut back on parts of my business that now that the colouring books are doing well, I didn't really need to keep spending time on. I was still mailing things out from my studio and had that sort of merchandising side going, but I've cut that back entirely, and it's given me a lot more time now to start pursuing other big projects like getting back into writing again. And young adult fantasy, epic fantasy is what I'm going to be working on.
Brilliant. Well, it's been really fascinating talking to you, Selena, and seeing how you've done this. You, in your own way, you've been a little bit of a pioneer in this area. You were right there at the right time, right place. But I think you got it right as well in the way that you approached it.
There's a fair bit of luck involved, but it's also, being able to be adaptable and, having a few different things out there so that you have the chance of, striking gold or finding, if I hadn't have put that one colouring book out just to, see how it went, then I wouldn't have had that chance to see what happened with the trend.
Yeah, but then you made the most of your opportunity, which was great, and full of admiration for you. Superb, excellent. Well, I always say this to our Australian friends, that one day we will get to Australia, without doubt, and it would be great to meet you.
It is a long way to travel.
It is, but it's a great place.
Yeah.
And
it's a wonderful place.
Yeah, I've missed it since we were my one time there back in 2012, but it's we will put it on our radar. I think it is on our radar. We'll try and turn it into an air ticket at some point in the next.
There's quite a big community of indie authors and publishers out here. All up in Queensland, mostly, a lot of them. Okay. Anytime that I've seen, in a Facebook group or something, people say, where are you from? Almost all of the Australians say that they're from up in Queensland. There's a lot of writers.
And whereabouts? Queensland goes on forever. Is that like the Brisbane end or up towards Cairns or the top end? Or?
Yeah, so mostly around the Brisbane end, I think, from what I've seen.
Well, that's not too far. That's doable from where you are, isn't it, Brisbane?
Oh, yeah. Well.
Cairns is a long way.
Yeah.
Good. Selena, thank you so much indeed for joining us. I know it's the evening over there, so you could relax and have a cold one. I've got a whole day's work ahead of me. The day you've just had, I've still got to do.
That's right. Yeah, we're all time travelers down here. That's how it is.
Amazing. That's been great. Selena, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There you go. So really, I loved talking to Selena because it's just really interesting to talking to somebody who's found a niche, is killing it in that, to use the kind of vulgar entrepreneurial expression. And as we said before the interview, I bought one of the books after it just to sort of feel it in my hands and see what it felt like. And a very, very impressive, very good quality. So this, I think, for some people who've been scratching around and perhaps find it difficult to sort of write novel-length books, this could be sparking some ideas for people, because there's definitely... the apparatus is there. If you've got the ideas, you can see the demand. You can be one of the suppliers in a smaller market.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for something like that, there's a barrier to entry in that you need to be able to draw, right? So, I mean, obviously, I couldn't do that. That is not one of my skills at all. Selena is really, really is a very good artist. That's really clear. But you're right. There are other products that you could get into, into the market. Recipe books, gardening books. To off the top of my head, you could have instructional manuals. Joseph Alexander, who we've had on the podcast, he sells most of his instructional guitar books as POD. People buy those things as physical items. They don't necessarily want to read on a device. They want to annotate them or want to write on the pages. They want to color in books like that. So there are tons of opportunities. And we extolled the virtues of Amazon last week, and it's worth doing again. I mean, that would not, this whole industry would not be possible with all of the variations and the opportunities that have been made available. That wouldn't be impossible without the kind of the innovations that Amazon has brought to the market.
And also, it's about attitude and wanting to empower and enable. Amazon have always done that. I can remember really in the early days of Amazon, when I was a local reporter going to the big centre, Milton Keynes, just after being built. I think there was a Harry Potter release or something then, and it became the right place to go. Robots moving around delivering these books. And I remember them saying they were launching Amazon Marketplace so that people could sell their own stuff on there. And I said, what, in competition with the stuff you're selling? That doesn't make any sense, because we take a cut of that. There's always been their attitude is to grow and enable. And there's no reason, by the way, once PDFs were around, that the traditional publishing industry couldn't have enabled something like this, allowed you to create your own print on demand and allowed those big print works that they use.
More than that, they could have made their own Kindles.
They could have made their own Kindles, but it's not just about the technology, it's about a willingness to, as you say, democratize. I think was a really good word for that.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well done for your vocab. I'm not sure about the word memorist. Is that what you said?
Memoirist.
A memoirist. Yeah, I think it's a memorist.
I think you start quibbling about language with me. You're going to lose.
Okay, well, look, delight to talk to Selena. I hope we bump into her one day at one of the conferences, because a really good story and a great entrepreneur, working away in the great spirit of the modern way, just in her bedroom, in her front room in her house, and building a sizable business. So good for her. Great. Okay, I think that's it for our little mini batching recording here in the summer of England. We're going to be back live in person. Have a great week in Lowestoft, Mark.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will. What am I doing? Actually, Lowestoft is, it's not a great, it's down in its luck. Most coastal towns in the UK are struggling for lots of different reasons, but Lowestoft has a beautiful beach. It has a really beautiful beach. So I think the forecast is quite nice. So we'll be going down there, and I'll be chasing small children around for a week.
Your own small children?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will be.
Just to clarify.
I had a hell of a week last week. My son ended up. I was called to the daycare place that my kids were at last Wednesday, and they said, "Don't want to worry you, Mr. Dawson, but we think Samuel might need to go to casualty because he's bleeding from the head." I'm like, "Oh, I'm worried now." So I had to go and take Samuel to a hospital after some boy hit him with a toy train on his scalp. Which
I think you did tell this story last week on last week's podcast. 2 weeks podcast. Yeah, just for regular listeners who now note that you're repeating yourself.
Well, yeah, I'm getting old. And then, I probably mentioned someone drove into the back of my car as well.
Yeah. So, what is the news on your car? That's what we want an update. Has it been written off?
No, not yet. I'm still waiting to hear. The garage called me this morning and said, we're still waiting for the body shop to say what we're going to do with it. But in the meantime, they've given me a Range Rover Sport, and my God, it is the biggest car I've ever driven. It's a tank.
So basically. This is not the Evoque. This is the full size Range Rover.
No, it's a full size big.
So this is the one I'm thinking about hiring for a week to drive down to our skiing holiday, because I think my XC6 is a little bit too small. We take an extra person.
It's very comfortable.
3 people on the back seat comfortably.
I think can you put 7 in? I think you can definitely get 3 very comfortably. It's a really big car.
Okay.
And I park it in a multi-story car park over the way from my office, and getting it in is
an adventure.
It's a bit of an adventure. It's like there's about an inch of clearance with the mirrors on either side. So, that's been challenging. But,
Okay.
Fun and games.
We are now we're full into Waldorf and Randolph, whoever the Muppets were called. Old men rambling.
Waldorf and Astoria.
Astoria, is that? Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure. I might be wrong. But,
okay. Good. Well, look, have a great week. Yes, I'm going camping. And I went up to the North Norfolk coast yesterday, and it is this part of England is beautiful. The beach, Brancaster Beach, is sensational. Absolutely.
North Norfolk Digital?
North Norfolk Digital is the home of Alan Partridge, my alter ego. Never seen in the same room. Good. Look, that's it. We're going to be back next week. I think I know what's coming up, but I'm not going to preview it just in case we've put the Amazon interview in there, because we'll try and turn that around, I think, as quickly as we can once we get back from that interview. That's it. Mark, great. Have a nice time off. We'll see you when we come back. Thank you so much indeed for listening. Don't forget you can support the show at patreon.com/self-publishing show. And we'll see you next Friday. So until then, I'm going to say it's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from him. Aha.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with The Self-Publishing Show.